Well, in the young mind of this mortal of Urantia, that being the name of our world, while growing up in Chicago in the 1940s and 50s, there existed great confusion respecting what and where the forum was that my dad was going to on Sunday afternoons. For a long while, I wondered if it was the Forum cafeteria on Madison Street in the Chicago Loop. Frequently, whenever my family would make excursions downtown, we would eat there. Just recently, I thought of it for the first time in years and mentioned it to my sister. Carolyn thought Dad deliberately chose that place because of its name. By the time, don't die on me here. Oh, come on. Wait a minute. Okay. By the time Carolyn joined the forum in late 1951, I knew it was not an eating place in the Loop, but some kind of a meeting on Diversey Parkway on the city's north side, a few blocks west of Lincoln Park. Soon afterward, I began hearing the word Urantia at dinner conversations. Eventually, I learned that this was the name of our planet from the perspective of celestial beings. I rather liked that idea because by that time, I already knew that Earth meant world or planet. And I thought that if we were only one of many inhabited worlds in the universe, certainly we would have a more distinguished name. And how had I come to believe that there were other inhabited worlds? Because Dad had told me so. Only later did I realize that for years, he had been inculcating in me ideas from the Urantia papers. Sometime in the spring of 1952, Carolyn began working as receptionist for Dr. William S. Sadler, the psychiatrist whose office was in the same building where the forum was. I understood he had some kind of connection with the forum, but I wasn't sure what. Before the end of the year, Carolyn brought her fiance, Tom Kendall, into the forum. By this time, my mom, who had never shown much interest in the group, began to think, well, if the forum is good enough for my future son-in-law, there must be something to it. She became a member sometime in the spring of '53. Dad was secretly pleased, as Mom had been a long-time holdout. This marked a turning point in their marriage, which for years had been marked with tension and suspicions. For the few remaining years of their marriage, Dad died in 1959 at the age of 70, there was a more loving relationship between them. With the household now just consisting of Mom, Dad, and me, I began hearing more about the Urantia papers and started becoming interested. In June 1953, I attended my first social event of the forum, a picnic at the Winnetka home of Bill and Mary Lou Hales. If their son, John, 2 years older than I, was there, I don't remember meeting him. On that occasion, I met several people with whom I was to become better acquainted over the years. I probably had met Dr. Sadler before then. By then, he was in his late 70s, white-haired and portly. It was likely no later than this occasion that I met Doctor's sister-in-law and her husband, Anna and Wilfred Kellogg, and they were cousins to each other. Doctor's wife, Lena, had died around the time I was born, so I never knew her. At this picnic, I remembered that I had to be on my own for a while because there was a meeting of the members of the forum and I was excluded. In early August of that year, '53, my family moved from Chicago to the northwest suburb of Prospect Heights. It must have been that summer that I too expressed an interest in joining the forum. However, as I was about to begin high school, Dr. Sadler thought it best that I wait a while before joining. And so it was that on June 30th, 1954, shortly after my 15th birthday, I had my interview with Dr. Sadler. Dad and Carolyn sat in with me. My sister had sat in on several other interviews, and she says every time Doctor told the story a little differently. I no longer can remember everything that Doctor might have told me, but I know he mentioned the visits he would make with Howard Thurston, the magician, to expose fake mediums. Of course, he told me about the longtime patient he had who seemed to be a conduit for celestial beings. Dad and Carolyn had already told me about that. I remember Sadler telling about the locked safe and Midwayers saying that it was not necessary to go to such extremes to test them. What else he might have told me that night, I cannot separate with certainty from stories I have subsequently heard over the years. Of course, doctor never revealed the identity of the longtime patient nor stated if he was still living at that time. I should make it clear that by 1942, the forum had ceased to exist as the sounding board for the writing of the Urantia papers, but it was still a closed group for years after that. Anyone wishing to join the group had to be recommended by someone else and then be interviewed by the doctor. I did not attend my first meeting of the forum until the following September, as the group always recessed for the summer. Memory serves me that I missed only 2 meetings that entire year of 54, 55. The meeting started at 3 o'clock and ran until 5 with a break about halfway through. Because the book had not yet been published, the format for the weekly meetings was for Bill Sadler, William S. Sadler Jr., to read the paper aloud. Only after the reading were any questions allowed. Bill had an excellent speaking voice and was a very good reader. If he was ever absent, either his father or Christy, Emma Christensen, would be the reader. For a long time, I had the understanding that Christy was the adopted daughter of Dr. Lena Sadler, and I frequently referred to her in my diary, which I had started keeping in January 1957, halfway through my senior year in high school, as Christy Sadler. But apparently, there was no formal adoption, and I'm sure that was not any legal name for her. But I always understood she was Christy Sadler. That first year, the forum was then part 1. Here I was, a 15-year-old mingling with old people, folks in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and listening to the hardest part of the Urantia papers. I'm sure I comprehended very little, but I felt it was my duty to attend and get what I could out of the meetings. There was no one else close to me in age. John Hales never attended the meetings. Bill Sadler's 2 older children, Billy, William III, and Patricia, who were a few years older than I, occasionally may have sat in on some of the meetings. Chuck, who was a year younger than I, was not a member of the forum. On my own, I was reading part 3 of the papers. In order to do that, I accompanied my parents on Wednesday nights, and Mom and I sat in a room on the first floor and read there. Each page was pasted on stiff manila board and looked exactly the way it did in what was to be the first printing of the Urantia book. Mom and I always had to make arrangements in advance for the papers we wanted to read that evening, and usually it was either Wilfred or Anna Kellogg who had them ready. If Dad was with us that evening, he would be upstairs in the forum room attending the 70, the advanced study group that started in 1939. This continued to be the routine until October 12, 1955, Eric Cosh's 17th birthday, when the Urantia book was published. When Dad came home that night from the 70 with the copies he had ordered, he brought me my own copy, which I have to this day. In it, I inscribed, "Published and given to me on the 12th day of October, the year commonly known as 1955 AD. In my adolescent fervor, I guess I thought that once the teachings of the Urantia book became universal, the calendar would change. Perhaps I thought 7 BC would become year 1. I speak with considerable assurance when I say that I was the youngest member of the forum at the time the book was published. At the time, I was 16. I don't recall how quickly the forum changed with the Sunday meetings, with everyone now having his or her own book. They could read along with Bill when he was speaking. The forum was no longer a closed group. Urantia Brotherhood had been formed the preceding January 1955. My dad became one of the original 36 members of the first General Council and remained until his death. In the spring of '56, the forum became what was called the First Urantia Society, and I was a charter member. When the Urantia book was published, no major newspapers reviewed it. Many forum members were disappointed in the reactions they received when they tried to present copies to longtime friends. I remember one of Mom's friends saying it was not the kind of book she could curl up with in bed. Dad sent it to the Army buddy who became a Methodist minister and conducted my parents' wedding. Roy told Dad, "Clarence, I think you've gotten yourself mixed up with something bad." In the early years of the Brotherhood, there would be quarterly reports of the Sunday meetings on the reception of the Urantia book. By early 1957, it was reported large groups were congregating in Culver, Indiana, and Oklahoma City. The former was thanks to Reverend Meredith Sprunger, who was introduced to the UB shortly after its publication and announced it to his congregation. A woman named Berkeley Elliott was a leader in Oklahoma City, and Bill Sadler eventually became involved with this group. The Brotherhood sent out copies to many well-known people and generally was rebuffed. Nobel Prize-winning author Pearl S. Buck denounced it, calling it uninspired and poorly written. Film director Cecil B. DeMille returned his copy saying he didn't have time to read a 2,000-page book. I had just seen the 4-hour long, the 10 Commandments, so I guess he had time to make movies that long. A woman said she would like to see the Jesus Papers dramatized on TV. On October 12, 1960, I wrote, "Today marked the 5th anniversary of the publication of the Urantia book. It's hard to believe the book has been out that long already. Considering the book has been publicized only by word of mouth and no advertising in newspapers or magazines or on radio or television, I think it has done quite well. Some 7,000 copies have been sold. There are 5 Urantia societies, numerous study groups all over the country and overseas, including one underground in Saudi Arabia." I found that interesting, but apparently that was true even then. "Several libraries and universities have the book, as well as several prominent people, including Mamie Eisenhower and her brother-in-law Milton Eisenhower, president of Johns Hopkins University. And the book is being translated into French. Assuming that I live of normal life expectancy, I imagine the book will be fairly well known and certainly very controversial by the time I die." It was interesting to rediscover this diary entry. I had no idea those were my feelings after just 5 years. I wonder now if I had already begun to lower my expectations. 7,000 copies? Wow, not exactly a bestseller. On June 27, 1961, the Orvonton Urantia Society was installed. It was the outgrowth of a study group led by Al Leverins that I had been attending for some 3 years. Carolyn and Tom Kendall and I transferred from the first Urantia Society to become founders. But almost immediately, I became an inactive member of Orvonton, as that September, almost on the spur of the moment, I went off to college at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb. During the interim 4 years after high school, I had bummed around for a while with no real focus in my life. Being off to college for the next few years, I had little time to participate in Urantia activities. Here is something from my diary 2 years later on August 24th, 1963. This evening, Mom and I attended the social session of the Urantia Study Seminar at 533. Reverend Sprunger, who is the Brotherhood's field representative, gave his opinions on the future of the movement. He said it has taken most religious movements in this country some 30 years to become nationwide and better known, so he estimated it would be sometime in the 1980s when the Urantia movement would achieve a moderate degree of fame. He warned us to someday expect a great amount of publicity, either in the form of an attack by a fundamentalist preacher, or less likely, favorable praise from someone well-respected. Sprunger felt that the future of the movement lies in 2 main camps, in our nation's colleges and universities and among progressive religious leaders.